Rain lashed against the pavement as a fragile white cane struck the polished granite steps of the Windermere Hotel. Inside, New York's most feared crime network held court. When she stumbled directly into the blade's chest, the entire room held its breath. Then he whispered a single terrifying word. Fifth Avenue was a cacophony of blaring yellow cabs, frantic curses, and the relentless drumming of a sudden summer downpour. Mina Seo tightened her grip on the strap of her carbon fiber violin case, letting its familiar weight anchor her against the surging crowd. To be blind in New York City was to navigate a turbulent ocean entirely by sound and touch. To do it during a flash flood was practically a death sentence. Her white titanium-tipped cane swept left and right in rhythmic, practiced arcs, but the rising water was quickly swallowing the tactile feedback of the pavement. Her shoes were already soaked through. Desperation clawed at her throat. She needed shelter, and she needed it immediately. Through the roar of the storm, she heard the distinct muffled hush of heavy revolving doors and the faint elegant strain of a string trio playing something achingly slow. The hotel lobby, guided by the warmth radiating from the building and the subtle scent of orchids and floor wax, Mina pushed her way through the brass doors of the Windermere. The immediate silence of the grand foyer washed over her, a stark, comforting contrast to the chaos outside. She paused, shaking the rain from her dark hair, her chest heaving as she tried to orient herself in the vast, echoing space. She didn't know she had just walked into the epicenter of a war. Less than 50 feet away, Ji-ho Kang was descending the grand staircase. He moved with the predatory grace of a man who owned not just the building, but the very lives of everyone inside it. Clad in a bespoke charcoal suit that clung flawlessly to his broad shoulders, Ji-ho was the undisputed head of the Kang organization, the most feared syndicate on the eastern seaboard, born out of Koreatown 3 decades ago and grown into something far larger and far darker. A heavy platinum watch peeked from beneath his French cuffs, a cold testament to inherited wealth and inherited violence. He was flanked by 6 armed men led by his ruthless second, Do-yoon. They had just concluded a brutal negotiation in a private suite upstairs. A rogue faction of the Baek family had attempted to siphon funds from Kang's offshore accounts in Macau. Ji-ho had dealt with the traitor personally, leaving a broken, bleeding man on the silk rug of the penthouse suite. Ji-ho's adrenaline was still running high, his dark, calculating eyes scanning the lobby for threats. He was a man who trusted no one and forgave nothing. "Bring the convoy to the front," Ji-ho ordered Do-yoon, his voice a low, gravel baritone that commanded absolute obedience. "And have the Baek warehouses in Sunset Park burned to the ground before midnight. Leave no witnesses." "Consider it done, boss," Do-yoon replied, reaching for his earpiece. Ji-ho took another step toward the exit, his mind already shifting to the logistics of a full-scale war. And then it happened. Mina, disoriented by the sudden shift in acoustics and the lingering panic from the storm, took a hurried step forward to find a concierge desk. Her wet heel caught the edge of a slick marble tile. She lost her balance, her heavy violin case throwing her violently off-center. She pitched forward, her hands flying out to brace for a painful impact with the floor. Instead, she slammed into a wall of solid, unyielding muscle. The impact knocked the breath from her lungs. Her white cane clattered loudly against the pristine marble, the sharp sound echoing like a gunshot in the cavernous lobby. In a fraction of a second, the atmosphere in the Windermere shifted from luxurious tranquility to lethal tension. Click-clack. The unmistakable, terrifying sound of 6 pistols being drawn and racked filled the air. Do-yoon and the bodyguards instantly formed a tactical semicircle around their boss, weapons trained directly on the soaking wet girl who had dared to breach Ji-ho Kang's personal space. "Back away," Do-yoon barked, his finger tightening on the trigger. Mina froze, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs. She couldn't see the guns, but she could smell the sudden metallic tang of gun oil and the sharp scent of cologne. She could hear the rustle of tailored suits and the heavy, synchronized breathing of men ready to kill. Terror paralyzed her. She was trapped against the chest of a man who felt like a statue carved from granite. Ji-ho had reacted entirely on instinct. When the figure tumbled toward him, his combat reflexes had flared, but as his large, calloused hands gripped her shoulders to shove her away, he looked down. Time seemed to fracture and grind to an absolute halt. He saw the long, dark hair plastered to her pale cheeks. He saw the panicked, sightless eyes staring blankly at his collarbone, and then his gaze locked onto the faint crescent-shaped scar resting just beneath her right jaw. a scar he had paid the world's best surgeons to minimize 10 years ago. Ji-ho's breath hitched in his throat. The cold, calculating boss, a man who had just ordered the deaths of dozens without blinking, suddenly looked as though he had been struck by lightning. His grip on her shoulders softened, shifting from defensive aggression to a desperate, possessive hold. "Boss," Do-yeon asked, confusion lacing his aggressive tone. "Give the word." Ji-ho didn't look at his men. He didn't look at the terrified patrons cowering behind the lobby pillars. His eyes were entirely consumed by the trembling girl in his arms, the girl he had spent a decade watching from the shadows. The girl he had promised to protect at all costs. He leaned down, his lips brushing against her ear, and whispered a single word that sent a shockwave through the room. "Mine." The word wasn't a claim of property. It was a desperate vow, laced with a decade of hidden guilt, and an obsession that defied all logic. The absolute silence that followed was deafening. Mina trembled, her heightened senses rapidly processing the overwhelming stimuli. The man holding her smelled of cedar, rain, and the faint underlying scent of fresh blood. "Put the guns away," Ji-ho commanded. His voice wasn't raised, but it carried a lethal authority that brooked zero hesitation. "Ji-ho, we don't even know who." Do-yeon started. "I said put them away." Ji-ho's glare was so venomous it made the seasoned killer take a physical step back. The sound of weapons being holstered rippled through the lobby. Mina finally found her voice, though it was barely a whisper. "I'm sorry. I couldn't see. I slipped. Please, just let me get my cane." She tried to pull away, but Ji-ho's hands remained firmly, gently planted on her arms. "You're not going back out there," he said softly, his tone completely shifting from the monster he had been seconds prior. He reached down effortlessly, retrieving her fallen cane and pressing it gently into her trembling hand. "Do-yeon, take her violin. Careful in. It's a Garneri. If you scratch it, I will take your hand." Mina gasped. How could a complete stranger possibly know the exact make of her prized instrument? Before she could protest, Ji-ho draped his heavy, dry wool overcoat around her shivering shoulders. "Walk with me, Mina." Hearing her own name fall from this dangerous stranger's lips sent a jolt of pure ice down her spine. "Who are you? How do you know my name?" she demanded, trying to dig her heels into the marble. But his forward momentum was unstoppable. He was guiding her through the revolving doors, surrounded by a shield of armed men. "I'm someone who owes you a debt," Ji-ho replied cryptically as they stepped out into the storm. A massive black-armored Genesis limousine was idling at the curb, its rear door already held open by a stoic driver. "I'm not getting in a car with you," Mina shouted, panic finally overriding her shock. She swung her cane defensively, but Ji-ho simply caught it mid-air with lightning speed. "Mina, listen to me," Ji-ho said, his voice dropping to a desperate, intense register. "Jung-hoon Baek's men are kicking down the door of your apartment on West 106th Street right now. If you go home tonight, you will die. Get in the car." The sheer conviction in his voice, coupled with the terrifying mention of an invasion at her home, shattered her resistance. Numb with shock, she allowed him to guide her into the plush, heated leather interior of the Genesis. Do-yeon carefully placed the violin case in the trunk before climbing into the front passenger seat. As the heavy armored doors sealed shut, cutting off the noise of the storm entirely, the car merged seamlessly into the chaotic New York traffic. The drive was agonizingly silent. Mina sat rigidly against the door, clutching her cane like a weapon, while Ji-ho sat opposite her, his intense gaze entirely fixed on her face. He poured a glass of aged Korean brandy from the car's crystal decanter and placed it gently into her hand. "Drink. It will stop the shivering," he ordered softly. She took a small, burning sip, the liquid fire grounding her. "Why is someone trying to kill me?" she asked, her voice cracking. "I'm a violinist. I play at weddings and recitals. I don't have enemies." "You don't," Ji-ho corrected, pouring himself a drink. "Your father did." Mina's head snapped toward the sound of his voice. "My father, David Seo, was a corporate accountant. He died in a car accident 10 years ago." Ji-ho let out a heavy, cynical sigh. "Your father was a brilliant man, Mina, but he wasn't an accountant. He was the chief financial architect for the Kang organization." "My organization?" Mina's breath caught. "You're lying. My father was a quiet, boring man. He worked in a cubicle. He worked in a vault 3 floors beneath a jewelry exchange in the Diamond District. He laundered hundreds of millions of dollars for my father. He was a ghost in the financial system, the best we ever had. But 10 years ago, the Baek family found out who he was. They wanted the ledgers. Ji-ho leaned forward, the scent of his cologne enveloping her. That crash on the Cross Bronx Expressway wasn't a drunk driver, Mina. It was a Baek hitman named Victor. Your father swerved his sedan to take the brunt of the impact, so you would survive in the passenger seat. The shattered glass took your sight, but his sacrifice saved your life. Tears pricked Mina's unseeing eyes as buried trauma violently resurfaced. The screeching tires, the shattered glass, her father's final choked breath, holding her hand in the wreckage. "Why are you telling me this now?" she sobbed, the glass shaking in her grip. "Why ruin my memory of him?" "Because Jung-hoon Baek just found out that David Seo's daughter is still alive," Ji-ho said, his voice tightening with suppressed rage. "He thinks your father left an encrypted ledger with you. They were at your apartment tonight to torture it out of you." The Genesis smoothly pulled into a private subterranean garage, the heavy steel gates slamming shut behind them with a definitive clang. "For 10 years I have watched from the shadows," Ji-ho confessed, vulnerability jarring against his intimidating presence. Mina's mind raced as pieces of her life snapped together with terrifying clarity. "The anonymous scholarship to Gilead," she whispered. "Funded through a shell company in Zurich," Ji-ho confirmed. "The experimental cornea surgeries at Johns Hopkins paid in cash. I arranged those myself." Ji-ho reached across the console, his large, warm hand gently enveloping her trembling fingers. He didn't force the contact, allowing her to pull away if she chose to, but she was too stunned to move. "When my father passed, I took over the organization. I swore on his grave that the debt we owed David Seo would be paid. I promised to keep you safe. You were never supposed to know about me, Mina. You were supposed to live a beautiful, ordinary life in the light, far away from my darkness." The car door opened, and the cold air of the underground garage rushed in. "But tonight the darkness found you," Ji-ho said, stepping out and offering his hand to guide her. "Welcome to the Eyrie. You are standing in the most secure building in Manhattan. You will stay here until every last member of the Baek family is erased from this city." Mina gripped his hand, stepping out of the car. She had stumbled into the Windermere seeking temporary shelter from a summer storm. Instead, she had walked directly into a golden cage, held captive by a Mafia boss who had secretly orchestrated her entire existence. The penthouse at the Eyrie was a sensory fortress suspended a quarter-mile above the chaotic streets of Manhattan. For 3 days, Mina existed within a world of absolute, suffocating luxury. Her bare feet learned the topography of heated silk rugs and cool imported marble. The air was perpetually climate-controlled, carrying the subtle synthesized fragrance of green tea and cedar. Yet, despite the opulent comfort, it was a high-altitude prison. Ji-ho Kang treated her with a terrifying, reverent obsession. He rarely slept. Mina could hear the heavy, measured pacing of his handmade leather shoes on the hardwood floors late into the night. He fed her elaborate meals prepared by a private chef, provided her with racks of silk loungewear, and spent hours simply sitting in the corner of the grand living room, listening to her play her violin. But beneath the surface of this gilded cage, a Mafia war was boiling over. The Baek family, desperate and cornered, was tearing the city apart looking for her. Sirens wailed endlessly from the streets below, a distant symphony of the chaos Ji-ho was orchestrating to crush his enemies. On the 4th evening, the atmosphere in the penthouse shattered. Do-yun burst through the double doors, his heavy breathing audible even over the piece Mina was playing. "Boss." Do-yun's voice was tight, urgent. "Jung-hoon Baek just made a move on the Teterboro Strip. They intercepted a shipment of our heavy artillery. It's a bloodbath. They have our men pinned down in Hangar 4. Ji-ho cursed, the sound of a heavy glass tumbler slamming onto a table echoing through the room. Jung-hoon is getting desperate. He knows we're closing the net. I need to be there to coordinate the extraction. It's risky, Ji-ho, Do-yun warned. It could be a distraction. I don't have a choice. If I lose that shipment, the Commission will read it as weakness. Ji-ho crossed the room, stopping inches from where Mina sat with her violin. His voice softened, dropping an octave into that possessive tone that made her skin prickle. Mina, I have to leave for a few hours. The building is on total lockdown. The elevators require biometric clearance. No one gets in or out. Are you going to be safe? She asked, her voice trembling perfectly, projecting the image of the terrified civilian he believed her to be. "I'm always safe, love," he murmured, his knuckles gently brushing her cheek. "I'm leaving Tae-woo to oversee your detail. He's my top captain. You have nothing to fear." With a sudden rush of cold air and the heavy thud of the reinforced doors, Ji-ho and Do-yeon were gone. The vast penthouse fell into an eerie, suffocating silence. Mina sat perfectly still, her hands resting on the strings of her violin. She focused her hearing, mapping the room. She heard the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the whistling of wind against the floor-to-ceiling glass, and the deliberate heavy breathing of the man Ji-ho had left behind, Tae-woo. He was standing near the entryway. He smelled heavily of menthol cigarettes and a distinct underlying odor of nervous sweat. It was the sweat of a man whose adrenaline was spiking. "So," Tae-woo's voice finally broke the silence. It lacked the respectful deference he usually displayed around Ji-ho. There was a cruel, sharp edge to it. The famous Mina Seo, the blind princess sitting on a ghost fortune. Mina didn't move. "Ji-ho said you were here to protect me." Tae-woo let out a low, humorless chuckle. She heard the distinct, terrifying sound of a suppressor being screwed onto the barrel of a pistol. "Ji-ho is a fool. His obsession with you blinded him to the reality of business. You don't burn down half of New York over a girl. Jung-hoon Baek offered me $2 million and a territory in Flushing to open the door from the inside. The Teterboro attack? Just bait to get the boss out of the penthouse." Mina's breathing grew shallow. "You're betraying him." "I'm securing my retirement." Tae-woo was close now. She could feel the heat radiating from his body. "Jung-hoon doesn't want you dead, sweetheart. Not yet. He wants the ledger your father hid. The master account numbers for the Swiss and Macau shells." David Seo was a paranoid man. He wouldn't just destroy it. He left it with you. "I don't know what you're talking about," Mina whimpered, shrinking back against the neck of her violin. "I'm just a musician. I've been blind since I was 12. "Cut the crap." Tae-woo spat, reaching out and brutally grabbing a fistful of her hair, yanking her head back. Mina cried out in pain. "You're going to tell me exactly how to access those accounts, or I'm going to start breaking those delicate, expensive fingers of yours, one by one." Tae-woo made his first fatal mistake. He assumed her blindness equaled helplessness. He assumed the trembling girl in front of him was nothing more than a fragile victim. He didn't know that David Seo, a man hunted by the most dangerous criminals on the East Coast, had spent his final years preparing his daughter for the exact moment the shadows finally caught up with her. "Please," Mina sobbed, dropping her bow. Her hand scrambled blindly across the floor, desperately reaching for her white cane lying near the chair. "I'll tell you whatever you want." "That's a good girl," Tae-woo mocked, loosening his grip on her hair slightly, his guard dropping as his arrogance peaked. "Where is it?" Mina's fingers wrapped tightly around the grip of her cane. "The ledger isn't a book," she whispered, her voice suddenly devoid of all panic. The trembling stopped. The tears vanished. Tae-woo frowned, leaning in closer. "What did you say?" "I said." Her voice turned to ice. "It's not a book, you pathetic amateur." In a blur of motion so fast Tae-woo couldn't even process it, Mina didn't just stand. She exploded upward. Using her grip on his forearm as leverage, she twisted her body violently. Her left hand snapped up, driving the heel of her palm directly into the nerve cluster under Tae-woo's jaw with bone-rattling force. Tae-woo choked, his vision flashing white as his grip on her hair completely released. Before he could raise his suppressed pistol, Mina's right hand whipped the cane through the air. Her thumb depressed a concealed biometric button on the grip. With a sharp metallic snick, an 8-inch razor-sharp blade shot out from the tip. She slashed upward with lethal precision, severing the flexor tendons in Tae-woo's right wrist. A gurgling scream tore from his throat as the pistol clattered uselessly to the marble floor. He stumbled back, clutching his heavily bleeding arm in absolute shock. You, he stammered, unable to comprehend that the fragile blind girl had just surgically dismantled him in 3 seconds. Mina didn't hesitate. Her spatial awareness, owned by a decade of relying entirely on acoustics and air pressure, was flawless. She stepped forward, sweeping his legs out from under him with a brutal kick to the knee. Tae-woo crashed onto his back, gasping in agony. Mina calmly stepped over him, pressing the tip of her blade directly against his carotid artery. "My father didn't hide the ledger, Tae-woo," Mina said, her tone as cold and commanding as any boss's. He encoded it. It's hidden in the sheet music of an original piece he wrote for me. I memorized every account number, every routing code, every shell company when I was 15 years old. I've held the financial reins of the Kang and Baek empires in my head for a decade. Tae-woo stared up at her blank, unseeing eyes, absolute terror finally setting in. She wasn't a victim. She was a weapon her father had armed and left behind. I've known Ji-ho was watching me for 10 years, Mina continued, pressing the blade just enough to draw a bead of blood. I allowed his men to shadow me. I allowed myself to be brought here because I knew Jung-hoon Baek would eventually try to finish what he started. And I needed Ji-ho's resources to wipe the Baeks off the map. Suddenly, the heavy doors to the penthouse burst open with the force of an explosion. Ji-ho Kang stormed in, his suit jacket discarded, his dress shirt stained with blood, his pistol raised and ready to fire. Do-yeon and 3 guards flooded in behind him, weapons drawn, having realized the Teterboro attack was a diversion and racing back through the city like madmen. Ji-ho froze, the breath completely leaving his lungs. The scene before him defied all logic. His fragile, terrified Mina was standing over his top captain, a bloodied blade pressed to the traitor's throat. Her posture was flawless, radiating a lethal, cold authority that commanded the room. "Mina," Ji-ho whispered, lowering his weapon an inch, his mind struggling to process the dominant predator standing in his living room. Mina didn't turn her head. "He sold you out to Jung-hoon. 2 million and a slice of Flushing. He came for the ledger." Do-yeon looked at the bleeding, terrified Tae-woo, then at the blind violinist, his jaw practically hitting the floor. "Boss." She completely neutralized him. Ji-ho's shock slowly melted into something far more dangerous. A dark, magnificent smirk spread across his face. The obsession he held for the innocent girl morphed instantly into a profound, terrifying awe for the queen standing before him. "Do-yeon," Ji-ho ordered, his voice vibrating with lethal pride. "Take Tae-woo to the soundproof room downstairs. He gets to live until he tells us exactly where Jung-hoon Baek is sleeping tonight. Then he doesn't." "Yes, boss," Do-yeon said, roughly hauling the weeping traitor off the floor and dragging him out of the room. The doors clicked shut, leaving Ji-ho and Mina alone in the shattered luxury of the penthouse. Ji-ho holstered his weapon and slowly walked toward her. Mina pressed a button on her cane, the blade retracting seamlessly back into the shaft. He stopped inches from her, the scent of gunpowder and rain radiating from his clothes. He reached out, his blood-stained hands gently framing her face. "You played me," Ji-ho murmured, his thumb tracing the scar on her jawline. There was no anger in his voice, only a deep, reverent fascination. "For a decade, I thought I was the guardian angel protecting a helpless girl in the dark." "I was never helpless, Ji-ho," Mina replied, leaning into his touch, a dangerous smile finally breaking across her lips. "You just preferred the illusion. My father was the smartest man in your organization. Did you really think he'd leave me defenseless?" Ji-ho leaned down, his lips brushing against hers in a fierce, possessive promise. "Jung-hoon Baek dies tonight. Every warehouse, every safe house, every remaining soldier. His blood will burn before the sun comes up." "I know," Mina whispered, her hands sliding up to grip the lapels of his ruined shirt. "And when the ashes settle, Ji-ho, we rebuild this empire together." Unseen, Ji-ho kissed her deeply, sealing a pact forged in blood and deception. New York City didn't know it yet, but the balance of power in its underworld had just violently shifted. The untouchable boss of the Kang organization had finally met his match, and the most dangerous person in the criminal underworld was the one nobody ever saw coming.